right, so I guess we're gonna get this work session going in regards to nuisance, blight, and RA roles/procedures. So I think the reason why I wanted to have this meeting is to kind of make it a better, clearer path so everybody understands the roles of each of the committees and how they interweb with one another, so that way we can be more effective and quicker with our procedures. So I guess the best thing to do is start with the nuisance, because that's where everything normally starts, with the nuisance list. So I'll turn it over to John or Cheryl or Joyce, whichever would like to start with what the code office does with how to identify a nuisance property and what happens when it gets to that point on our end of the code office.
And then where it goes from there.
Well, after a property has 4 violations, they can be put onto the nuisance. It has to be in 1.
In 1 year. And,
And it can be,
I already have a question.
yes, question.
I was under the impression that council had voted and accepted a new system that was not a number of violations, but a point system.
so
So,
that's for the property nuisance abatement. That's a whole different, beast.
That's not how it was relayed to us, or, there, John, I'm not sure. I don't know if it might be helpful, Jill, do you think maybe, I made a chart and, of like a flow chart. Could we share what we have here too, because this is also kind of needed? Well, that's what I have them. Can I hand these out? I'm sorry, I didn't know what order these were going to
Yeah, go ahead, no.
This thing really cold things too. One, I know, it was too,
I got
but,
it.
on one side is
Derek, bring it
the
up.
flow chart of the activity of nuisance and blight review, and on the other side are all the team members that are involved with all of the different pieces. I'm just wondering if this would aid the conversation.
So can I now ask a question?
Yeah,
What's the difference between the nuisance list and the nuisance abatement list?
so,
There is an,
Okay, thank you. So it is a point system and not a number of violations.
well, we started off with the public nuisance abatement was for criminal activity.
so for example, the abatement, the goal of the abatement is when there are more violent actions taking place in a said property, not just a rental or any property at all. So for example, if there is an overdose or a shooting or some type of violent act, for example, they rank in higher points to get immediately put onto the nuisance list. So I'll say, for example, if there was a shooting, for example, that's automatic 12, automatic 12 points. Therefore, they would automatically be voted onto the nuisance list based on the criteria that we have. Yeah, go ahead.
If a criminal act happens in the house, then it goes on the point system, but the point system also goes on with, property maintenance, you know, grass and all that stuff, it goes on all of that.
Okay, so, but I'm concerned that we're already at the beginning, not talking about the same list or talking about the same list and what the criteria are to get there. So we either have number of violations or number of points. So it's been adopted by the city to do it a certain way, but we're not sure which way it's getting somewhere because these lists are the same but different.
Well, if you stop in tomorrow, I can get the.
I have it.
Oh, you do?
Because it's 2 pages versus 8 pages, and when those changes were made.
But we're using that, maintenance could be, whatever.
So property maintenance and what used to be, I think it was 3 violations within a 6-month period, I remember correctly.
That's on the two-pager?
Yes, the original. So that's how it used to be. They changed it into the nuisance abatement, I believe, the eight-pager. So the difference is it went to a point system, and then also it added a criminal activity element to it as well. 12, it's still 12 points for that part. So property maintenance, if I remember correctly, within the 10-pager is 3 points for each property maintenance violation. So in theory, it would be 4 violations, if you want to call it 4 violations, but it is a point system. So you are correct. Property maintenance is in that portion along with criminal activity.
And the lists are the same, nuisance and nuisance abatement. There's just a plethora of violations that can happen.
Correct.
And maybe I can jump in here, but I think part of it, the confusion is, the nuisance list is still the nuisance list. The nuisance abatement ordinance, okay, was a little different because nuisance abatement is what added the criminal activity to the nuisance, being able to be put on the nuisance list, okay? So I'm not sure how, I didn't even realize that we were calling the nuisance list the nuisance abatement list now. But the long and the short of it is, it's the same list, it just has additional criteria.
Well, and it being the same list, if we're gonna start at the beginning and have arrows drawn as to who does what next, it needs to be very clear that who does what next understands what next is, and what
Agreed.
list we're working from.
So to get on the nuisance abatement list, the criteria is in there, correct? Like the point scale and
Yes, in the
okay.
10 pager.
In the 10 pager.
Yeah.
So the criteria is in there how to get on the list.
I have a
So,
quick question. So if you said about shooting, so that's an automatic?
no,
If it happens in the house, in the
But
property.
is that automatic? Like,
It's not automatic. No matter what, council still has to vote to put someone on. So
So
it's not, it doesn't happen like overnight.
If he's renting an apartment and 2 people come and they're just having a party and all of a sudden it happens, why should he be?
In theory, council can vote or not vote to put anybody on nuisance. That is council's technically prerogative.
So are the police involved at that point to tell you who actually is living there and what actually happened?
So the police provides a report to the code office on said property, whether it's a rental property, homeowner property, it doesn't matter, they supply the report, whatever, they can put in a legal report to the code office so they can start the process of the documentation of where, what point system they received, and then the code.
But, I'm sorry, also, is it my understanding of the legal system that if a shooting happens, unless and until someone's prosecuted for that shooting,
Convicted.
you cannot actually take action, correct?
No,
Okay, okay.
no, because it's not, this is a legal distinction, okay?
Mhm.
But in the research I did, in all the cities and whoever has this ordinance already, we copied this ordinance directly off of other cities, okay? The cities that have it already has it tied to the property, not to the person committing the crime.
So that's how it's going back to the homeowner.
That's how it's going back
The
to the
property
homeowner,
owner and not
because it's tied to the
actual-
property itself.
person,
That would be.
So
perpetrator.
if a shooting
Yeah.
took place at XXX Road, if you can prove it took place, you don't have to prove who did it as far as this,
Gotcha.
okay?
Joel, that same reasoning is also the reason why you'll see on the public nuisance list, properties hang around, even after they've gone through the entire process on this flow chart, and they're sold to a new property owner. We keep them on the public nuisance list to keep everybody hot to trot and a plan in place with code office. And then when all of the code issues are mitigated, then it comes back around to be taken off, and that's because it follows the property,
Follows the
not
property,
the
exactly.
person. So,
Right.
thank you.
Right,
Just
nope,
to
I agree.
help clarify
When
that.
did the city adopt the abatement ordinance?
March of 2023.
2023.
March 2023.
Yeah, that seems pretty punitive to property owners. I mean, if I have a tenant and they get in a shootout and I'm just enjoying myself at on the other side of the half double I might be renting and I don't that's punitive to property owners, but that might be something we should revisit as a council.
So, and I also want to make a distinction for everybody. Just because you're on the nuisance property list does not mean that you can automatically go through the eminent domain process for whether that is the Redevelopment Authority or the city. So those are two totally distinct differences. Just because you're on that list does not mean you have enough to go, in the eyes of the courts, to go through eminent domain processes. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear. Just because you're on that list does not mean eminent domain processes can automatically start.
So then I think as a council, I think that we should also, I know the police, Josh, you said the police do provide reports to the code office, but I mean, I think that, so that maybe I don't need a structural overhaul of the ordinance, but I think I would like to see the reports come up from the code office and the police that said, hey, this person was engaged in a shooting or this crime was going on, and if the landlord knew, that was one thing, but if they didn't know, we can't distinguish that.
Well, normally normally the landlord doesn't know if there's gonna be a shootout or not there.
So, right, but that's why we should
Well-
punish them.
But, okay, then what's the difference? I just have a question here. What's the difference? I'm just going from one extreme to the next. Like, the snowstorm we just had, if I don't shovel the sidewalks and it's the property owner's, if it's the tenant's responsibility in the lease, is they still get a citation. Now, the citation goes to the property owner, correct?
Because the lease agreement is a legally binding contract that states who's responsible for
But, I mean,
that service.
so if I have also in my tenant, in my lease agreement that says, hey, there'll be no violent crimes at my set location, is not the same exact thing? Because we're both under the same understanding that, here are the set of rules that you're supposed to apply
But it
to.
doesn't say that if you commit a violent crime, that I'm going to be prosecuted.
But aren't I still being held responsible if I'm just using the little small extreme, but like, if I don't.
Absolutely, but what, in the legal standpoint, of having had one that had someone living there, we weren't able to actually file a full eviction process because there was no conviction. So I wasn't able to get rid of the tenant.
Oh, so you're talking about on a landlord aspect, if said incident occurs, how to get the tenant, is that what you're referring to right now?
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, okay, I guess I get that portion, but I don't know how that ties back into the abatement process. Like you're talking, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about as a landlord aspect on how to evict a
Because of the
tenant out.
legal.
Yeah, no, I understand that, I don't know how that ties back to the nuisance property process in general.
Because
Yeah,
they are
and
the
I
nuisance.
guess
They
my
are the
question
nuisance,
here
why
is
we
that-
can't get rid of them? We can't even get rid of tenants in the place if they are being a nuisance. That doesn't make sense to us, but y'all blame us for it, the landlords.
Well, I was just gonna say, I guess maybe I'm confused with what we were trying to get. I thought we were just getting together to discuss the procedure and the process of how a property goes from nuisance, blight, and how it gets remediated over to the redevelopment and things
Correct.
like that. So I think that's at least what I was under the understanding. I think there's maybe a miscommunication between everybody involved here, of where it goes first, what does it do next, and then how does it finally get disposed of. So I think Bree might
I was gonna say,
have some input to
Mayor,
help with that.
I wouldn't mind walking everyone through the process really quick. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but maybe we could hit our confusion points and iron them out together.
Sounds like a
If that
plan.
would work, because it does take a village to conquer blight, and we have quite a process that has been developed over time through trial and error, and also is always an evolving process. And so with the current team in-house here, this is what we are right now experiencing. So as Cheryl mentioned and Joyce, the code office is your front lines. They are working on the ground to see what is wrong in the city. They are citing using iWork. They document the citations. They even put pictures in and different evidence of what is going right and what's going wrong, and quite frankly in this situation, what's going wrong with the property. That culminates to the point where we get to a city council meeting where you're seeing a resolution put forth to add, remove, or update a public nuisance list.
Before it goes to that, the code takes it to the blight review committee.
Now, hang in there for a moment longer. But this is why we're doing this, so that if you can kind of hear the steps, because it is all based in law and a ping pong match, and so we have learned quite a bit along the way. So the city council, when you are adding properties, it is because it is vetted by the code office, that it has gone through, at least from the public nuisance abatement ordinance, the proper trigger has happened. That property owner also then has 30 days to mitigate the blight or enter into a rehabilitation plan with the code office. We do not immediately remove the property from the list at that stage. What we really want to do is encourage them to work with the code office, because there was something that drew attention to that property, and if we can stay ahead and prevent blight and further disrepair, we're all winning. And so the goal is to have direct lines of communication with code, get a game plan. There's certainly a level of cooperation around seasonal requirements, financials, you name it. The biggest thing is a conversation happens. Then, John, to your point, we also then have a process where we are working under the urban redevelopment law. The Redevelopment Authority is governed by the urban redevelopment law, and under the redevelopment law, we also have the formation of what we call in-house the Blight Prevention Review Committee. In the statute is Blight.
Blighted Property Review Committee.
Thank you. I've gotten away from having to say it. Note the prevention part. So the properties are brought to that committee as well as the Planning Commission. And the first step of the process is to determine a property blight. Statutorily, there are criteria that are laid out. And our resolutions follow the statute word for word. The first one on the list is whether or not it's a public nuisance property. So any properties that are really going to either of these committees would already qualify. But we hold it to a higher standard. We are looking for situations where it is becoming a public and health safety issue. It is affecting the neighborhood. It is a circumstance where it is rising to a level of disrepair that it's, you have buildings, back decks falling down, or mice and rodents causing health concerns, things that rise to a higher level. If the committee feels, and this goes to both the blight, the BPRC, so BPRC and SPC, goes to both tables. They are separate tables, and this is where teamwork comes into play, because you have volunteers from your community that are sitting on both, on all of these, at all of these tables, including yourselves, where you play a role. So both committees review the property. They review the safety criteria that is used for the public nuisance, where we have an iWork system, we have a code office documenting citations. There is a review of pictures. We use a screen like this or any kind of printouts. We have a thoughtful discussion of what's going on with each property. If the committee decides at either table that the property rises to the level of blight, is determined blight, then the property owner has 30 days, again, to speak up and appeal the process. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. We've only had a couple to date, but it does create a communications point. So there's another point where, for due process and for communications, we reach out to the property owner and we again encourage them to go to the code office and get a plan in place. If that happens, you'll see that on the public nuisance list, you may have a property that is on public nuisance, but in fact has a plan in place. Again, we're not taking it off until we are sure those code issues are handled. A lot of blight properties come hand in hand with other socioeconomic needs, such as mental health, other resources, and quite frankly, sometimes our code office, it ends up being a social worker, caseworker situation, and they have to meet all of those needs. The property owner, again, has the time period to appeal. If there's no appeal, and talking it through with code and thinking through where they are in the process, we come back around to another set of meetings. And this is where we'll have the Blight Review Committee and the Planning Commission look at the property again and assess, has there been any change? Sometimes there's a little change, most of the time there's none. And the property is again put under review, same criteria, thoughtful discussion, and then if it is determined that we have to move forward with the process, then it is what we call certified blight. Now, inject here, because I'm trying to make a simplification of where you see lots of arrows going around the screen, because another meeting that is happening is the Redevelopment Authority. The redevelopment authority is governed under the urban redevelopment law, and they can only address abandoned vacant properties. So no occupied properties can go to the redevelopment authority for next steps. While we were going through the process with the blight review, or BPRC and SBC committees, we also take the properties to the redevelopment authority, both residential and commercial, again, looking at the ones that are vacant. If they are properties that the city would like the redevelopment authority to further engage with, or if the redevelopment authority themselves determines that these are properties that they could take to the next step, then they do what we call identify. I'm trying to use some of the words from the statute, but we identify the properties for the planning commission, but we put it back to both the BPRC and planning commission to say, don't only certify a blight, but certify it over to the redevelopment authority for next steps. If it goes to the redevelopment authority, there are a number of tools in the toolbox. This is where the redevelopment authority can step in.
Thank you.
The redevelopment authority can step in a couple of different ways. One is to help assess any immediate mitigation of the blight, certainly health and safety concerns. Another is to pursue eminent domain. And a third is to actually revitalize the property. To this point, we've focused mainly on residential properties, and so we've kind of got a turning machine where we put those properties through an eminent domain process. Now, with each of the steps of public nuisance, blight determined, blight certified, and then starting the eminent domain process in the court system, there's again due process and notice and communication with the property owner. If there are any other lien holders, such as a mortgage or a tax lien, everybody receives notification of the process. This gives everybody a chance to speak up, because if anybody wants the property, then our goal is to again encourage them to work with us, work with code, get a plan in place, and ideally, we don't want to own properties, we don't want to maintain properties, we don't want to bring them up to code, we want the property owner to have ownership of their property. So we are looking for that every step along the way. Usually by the time it gets to the redevelopment authority, quite frankly, there's nobody speaking up, or it's a unique, nuanced case. Once we get out of eminent domain on the other side, the redevelopment authority then has several options in order to sell the property. Any sales or sale proceeds from the sale of the property, they go back into the blight program. We will note, and this is probably one of the things that I want to put my finger up for today's purpose, is that along the way as we've been developing this process, once upon a time it was the city went after the properties but delegated the process to the redevelopment authority. And so the redevelopment authority took on everything I was just describing, a little less formalized than we have it today. Moving into this situation, where it's a shift where it's actually the redevelopment authority filing for eminent domain, the redevelopment authority has continued to take on all the costs and the admin associated with the process. And so, for example, that's why you see me show up at city council meetings, or to pass through the grapevine notices and resolutions in order to add or remove from the public nuisance list, or why I show up at meetings for the BPRC and the Planning Commission with the admin piece of it. Because as a team player in blight removal, the redevelopment authority has taken on that task because it does take a lot of time and effort. And we wanted that to be part of our process and not necessarily weigh down the code office or other city officers. I think the other piece that I would pull in at this point is that we are moving into a new world where we are also looking at commercial properties together. And I think that this is an opportune time to understand there is a process here. And we go back and forth along the way. And as team players here, we all need to think about if we're going to tackle big commercial properties, we need to be a gelled together team more than ever. And so that means that there should be an open line of communication to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on and has what paperwork or what next step they need so we can all do our steps along the way. If you remove one of those boxes, it throws a jam in the whole thing. Speaking of jams, I will say that we went into the pandemic just starting to think about this process. During the pandemic, really fine-tuned it. Came out of the pandemic and had all the backlog of properties that had not been handled because of the pandemic. At this stage of the game, we are now in a position where I feel we are fully caught up. And so that's where when I presented the comprehensive report, you can see the numbers this year are a little less than last year. That's a good sign. We have less blight in our city, at least on the residential side. This, I will put out and challenge all of the team members here, means that we have an open door to think about the bigger commercial properties, because our residential part is churning. So anyway, I went a little on the soapbox there, but the bottom line is, if you flip it over, there are 25 plus core team members involved in this process. Additionally, we have community partnerships with the property owners themselves, additional code and city staff that are behind the scenes, the police department, the fire departments, the tax claims office, the court of common pleas. We have different stakeholders and investors involved. Independent contractors signed up to help us when we need to clean out a property because of a hoarding situation or other issues. We have caseworkers and third-party agencies that are tackling some of the socioeconomic issues, because if there's blight, there are other issues, I guarantee you, underneath that roof. And so really wanted to use this opportunity to actually get to present to you where this is a really well-developed and thought-out process that involves a lot of team players. And so if I can stand here and help you in any way understand where you may be confused about a step, or maybe didn't know about a step, or if there's a way that we can better clarify what is needed to accomplish a step, count me in. There you go.
I don't have a question, but maybe since you said, you talked about if it was unoccupied. Can you talk about if it's occupied, that portion, just so everybody understands that on here?
Sure, thank you. I meant to circle back to that. Thank you for pointing that out. So when we get to that point of whether a property is blight certified or not, or whether it's certified to the Redevelopment Authority, if it's blight certified and it is occupied, it stays in the middle of the table, almost like in the bucket. Because we need other tools to address that as a community. If it's blight certified and again identified by the Redevelopment Authority, then it goes just as I described earlier. There's also a case where if it's blight certified but it hasn't been yet identified or doesn't get identified by the Redevelopment Authority, then it goes into that middle bucket. Anything that's in that middle bucket, we are working with tools, and I know Joel and Derek are especially working with John and your team as far as ordinance development and research, especially on the state level, of where we can turn on ways to address blight when you have an occupied property. It's very tricky. I will say that that's where I will personally appreciate all those communication points that I mentioned, because you're in constant contact. And I will say that we post things on the property. We do every kind of notice possible. We chase down addresses. The code office is hard at work at this because we want folks to know there's something wrong. The thing with blighted properties is they can go downhill very quickly. And if you've ever seen on a street that's just beautiful and then you have the eyesore on the end or in the middle, we want to capture the property, whether it's occupied or vacant, with as much prevention lead time as possible, because it's the difference of whether that property can be renovated and put back on the tax rolls, or we have to demo it and now we have a jack-o'-lantern situation. The city, you have the bigger challenge when it comes to occupied properties, because it is challenging around the tools there. You know, you can only do so much, you know, to get the property owner's attention and, you know, to get action. But we're trying every option we can, and I don't know if that went in detail enough.
Question. From the time the code says this is blight
Yes.
until it goes through the whole process, just to give everybody some idea how long that takes until you can acquire it. How long is that process? Is pretty long.
So let me give you a couple of timeframes to keep in mind. With most of our properties, if there is any taxes owed, we're in direct contact with tax claims, because you want to put properties on both tracks. We just even heard this morning, their time frame for the tax claims process is about 3 years for round one, add another 3 for 2 and more. Our process typically takes, I would say, if it's a no nuance property, plain vanilla, you're still looking at a good year, maybe year and a half of the ping pong match back and forth, because you have to allow for the time periods for the notice. You have to recognize there's some delays over, we want there to be conversations with code. We want them to attempt to fix their properties. We want to have sort of a delay in the middle. The other thing that we work around is just the timing of meetings. So we may hit day 31, but the next meeting isn't for 3 weeks. We have gotten pretty good at scheduling all of the meetings within a week of each other. So we are constantly trying to keep it on the same timing, if you will. The other part of it is that if a property is on the tax claims list, we watch it. There are 2 types of tax sales. There is the first is just the general tax sale. It does not wipe any liens. It just simply is a way to pay the taxes. Most properties do not get bought, at least not by savvy folks at that level. They wait for the judicial sale, which is the second round. When you get to the judicial sale, it's much like the eminent domain process, where it will wipe the title clean. And it really, it gives a second lease of life for the property, and the new property owner can move forward without those liens present. If we have a property, and I will say when I started, we had page after page after page of properties. We've worked, again, this team has worked nonstop for the last, going on 20 years here. And we are now at the point where you might see 2 or 3 properties pop up. Chances are we're aware of them, we know about them. We do have a relationship with tax claims and the taxing authorities, that if it is a higher tax amount, we try to let it go the tax process, because those taxes can go back into the city, the school districts, the county, and that process is its own measure of success. If the property does not sell at the judicial sale, then it goes into a repository where we actually can then, as a redevelopment authority and as a city, we can purchase the property for $1 plus the cost of transfer fees. So it typically ends up being under $150. And again, then we have the property. I should mention that under the urban redevelopment law, and an advantage of having the redevelopment authority tackle our piece of the project, is that we now have the team of, if a new property owner purchases a property from the redevelopment authority, they have to sign the equivalent of a contract. And so they have to fulfill the requirements of the blight program. So that means that they have to get a plan in place with code. They have to be communicating, and we're watching them for the future. So that if they don't fulfill the plan, we can speak up and say, why not? And take steps from there.
What do you do with, sorry.
So, no, please.
What do you do with the residents if it goes on blight, there's people living in it, what do you do with the people living in it?
Well, that would be
That would be our problem. Yeah, that doesn't get to the RA, yeah.
So that would be up for us to figure out, and we probably, in my opinion, Joel can chime in here anytime he wants, but I'm assuming we would have to find alternative living conditions that are equal or better to what they currently have, and then we deal with the property.
Would that, let's say it's tenants, would that be still up to us or up to the person owning it?
And I think, I mean, Joel, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, well, number one, we'd have to take it. And in order to take it, there'd have to be new housing for whoever was living there, obviously. But in addition to that, it's expensive to take those properties because you have to have an appraisal and you have to have remuneration for the owner, dependent upon the eminent domain process. So it becomes a point that if we can get them to fix it, we want them to fix it. We don't want to take it. Exactly as Bria's saying.
Well, sort of like, think about what your measures of success are here. For this program, you know, one measure of success is that the property owner goes, oh my goodness, I didn't realize, and works with code office and fixes the property up. You know, life happened. We've all had life happen on occasion. that's a great measure of success, or a moment of success, I should say, because we want the property owner to take care of their property. If we have to move forward, we want to find mechanisms of way to recoup the costs and the time and the energy of the city, and so we build that into the process. We want to make sure that the properties are well maintained so that their neighbors are not being impacted by the property. So that's another piece I that's a question on the table is, oh boy, Jeff, I don't remember, it was maybe 2 years ago, I think. The Redevelopment Authority, because we go through our process and we're asserting to the court that the property is blighted and we're wiping liens, somewhat limited in what we can do as far as paying back any of the city costs directly. And so what we have looked for is creative approaches to teamwork here. And one of those is like helping the city out with buying lawn mowers and snow removal or ice melt. Trying to aid with when we've had some code officer shortages as far as making sure that it doesn't land on your shoulders. You definitely took on extra weight over the summer on that, and it's just trying to figure out creative ways that we can help. And some of that has been, again, taking on the admin and sort of behind the scenes coordination of all of this, but also we have the deal struck in exchange for that maintenance and equipment, that the Redevelopment Authority owned properties would be considered like the public nuisance properties and taken care of and sort of watchdogged by the code office. And that has worked out really, really nicely because chances are, code office with being boots on the ground, they're going to see an issue there before we do. We do cover the change of the locks. We have been in communication about even covering costs of supplies when the things have had to be boarded up or extra expense. But generally speaking, that has been part of being part of the team. And Josh, I did see your hand go up, so can I clarify there?
Yeah,
Okay.
so once it's on the nuisance list, it's the code, this is my understanding, it's the code office's responsibility to monitor that property, whether it's improving or not improving, correct?
So if you're on the public nuisance list, you own your property, just like any other property.
Yeah.
You continue to be responsible for your
Yeah.
property. We do know from going to the district magistrate's office that it's ideal to not cite that property for more than or less than a 2-week span.
Yeah.
Because obviously
You give
it's
them
high
time
alert.
to, you give them time
Yes.
to improve. So
Yes.
let's just say,
Yes.
for example, I'm just gonna say, I don't know, the porch is falling off, I don't know.
Right.
So obviously, they've been cited, now there's a plan in place, they have, for example, we'll say 6 months, whatever it may be.
Right.
So is it the code's responsibility to monitor the progress on that
Yes.
property?
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so after progress either is made or not made, the code will make the determination if it comes off the nuisance list or it moves on to the next process, correct?
Correct, and they're showing up at all of the tables.
Yeah.
So they're
Okay.
here tonight, they go to the other 3.
Okay, so once it gets, let's just say, worst case scenario, it does not improve, it goes on the blight list. So is it, once it gets on the blight list, whose responsibility is it then to monitor the property? Is it still a code office's?
It's just like the public nuisance.
Okay,
It's just an identification process more than anything. There's no transfer of ownership.
Nope.
No.
so the code office monitors the property all the way through the process, whether it's nuisance, blight, or RA, until it is, for example, sold to a new a new owner, and still at that point, until they are taken off the list fully, the code office is monitoring those properties through each and every process, correct?
Yes, but I will put a finger up because the category of properties where they have been purchased by new owners or they have a plan in place, they are typically taking care of their properties.
Yeah.
So those are not needing the lawn care or snow
Yeah,
removal.
but still have to
or
make
things.
sure they're
Yes.
doing what they're saying.
And
And I
we give
would
them
say-
every opportunity to
Yeah.
complete.
Okay,
And I would say the current state of your list is the majority of them are in that category where they have a plan in place or they are new property owners coming in and again, more active than those that have exited.
I think,
Oh, sorry.
So you're asking, they follow it all the way through?
yes, that was my question. So
Thank
code
you.
follows a property all the way through.
Right,
Yes.
Okay, so,
as they should,
yeah,
because they're the ones that have the expertise in knowing the corrections or not.
yeah, okay, so with that being said then, we'll say said property needs new windows. So obviously, if there's progress, okay, we, for lack of terms, will let you alone. But when does it come to the point, like, okay, progress is too little to say it's progress? So for example, if a property needs 20 new windows, I'm just making a number here, and they put 1 window in every year, is that considered enough progress to let me alone until the next year? Or it's just like, okay, we see you're making progress, but you're just milking this out so you don't have to do more as quickly as we think you should do as the property is getting worse?
What we do is give them, look and see the problem. We have a paper that they're supposed to sign. They have some kind of contingency plan, what they're gonna do. We say, how long is it gonna take you to do it? If it's like, well, you can do that in 3 months, and they go, yeah, I'll have it done in 3 months. We go up again to see what they're doing. Then we say to them, well, you have, now we gave you an opportunity, now you have so many days to complete it. If it isn't done then they get cited. That's why we work with every
Yeah.
homeowner. We're not here to cite them and back
No,
them.
because
Just when-
I know a lot of people ask, they're like, this property's been on the list. We don't, I mean, as, you know, neighbors or whatever, we don't, someone drives by, they're being honest, we don't see any improvement, and they're asking us, why isn't anything happening? But,
So maybe I can answer, and I'm so sorry to jump
No, it's
too
okay.
fast. We're kind of excited in a very nerdy way to talk this through with you. So with the checks and balances that are in place, you've heard your table, you've heard the blight review committee table, the planning commission, and the redevelopment authority. In the case, let's say that property had been determined blight and is working with code on trying to fix the blight issues, in your case, the windows issue. If it were to the point where they were not acting, or the code felt that it was time to bring it back to the tables, which happens quite frequently, it'll come back to all of those tables as a checks and balances, and different people at each of those tables to evaluate, does this actually elevate to blight? Is this worth, pursuing further, especially when you're talking about eminent domain, where you're taking somebody's property away. And so it goes through different vetting, and if it's not certified, it doesn't go further. There have been cases where properties have been brought forward, similar case where maybe they've inched along. The committee has not felt that it has risen to blight, but we have then used different mechanisms to bring that to the attention of the property owner. And again, encourage them to get a plan in place with code, with, quite frankly, the statement that if they don't start to hurry up the process, then we will move forward. And if we do move forward, especially in a vacant property situation with eminent domain, they will have to explain to a judge another day why they didn't follow through on their plan, what the slowdown was. We want to make sure that we are giving them every opportunity to do so, and then also keeping in mind, the rest of the neighborhood.
I'm glad you brought up the courts, because that's another component that we haven't really touched on here, is, the court's threshold as far as them saying, and what in their definition is progress. Because sometimes you could have a property that has broken windows, that needs sidewalks, that needs painting, that has a roof problem, and they just do the sidewalks. The court said, well, they made progress. They did 1 of your 5, so they get another 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's not, fortunately and unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, they give them a lot of time to fix those things, because if they see them just making an effort, even in one sector of their problem, they're going to continuing let them fix it. If 6 months down the road they fix one of the other problems, chances are, in my opinion, they'll give them another 6 months. So they err on the side of caution, as the courts do, and rightfully so, because you don't want to take someone's property and 6th Amendment right away. I get that. But, that is something that me personally, I've seen with the court system, that's how they operate, at least locally here.
Actually, Joel, you'll love him. Your father used to actually go with us to the properties, and to see for himself. That was, the other judges have been as involved, if you will, as to that level. Because you're taking away someone's property rights, and before you do that, you've got to be really sure that you've looked at the whole picture.
There's financial hardship too.
Yeah.
I can only do this month, and I'll try to save up and do it the next month. They're making an effort.
Blight is not a profit-making operation. It is how do we, from a holistic standpoint, look at what the needs of the property owner are, what the needs of the city are, what the needs of the community members are, and balance all of that. And honestly, a real win is when you have taken care of all. And so we do interact with regularly those third-party agencies to tackle things like mental health, getting transitional homing. Again, the code officers end up being kind of like caseworkers, and I can't toot their horn enough, because if you don't have a strong home base on that front, we really can't do the rest of this effectively.
If I could jump in there, also financial responsibility and perception of the community and at large for blight program and redevelopment authority. We're frivolously filing for eminent domain over and over again. We're spending money into the court systems, and we're creating a very negative perception, particularly if we're going in on cases that we know we probably don't have a leg to stand on. And when you're there too much, it does not make the whole program and the city look good. We want to try and get through the process prior to getting to the court and taking the property away, and not look like we're just trying to take properties away.
We want to be more helpful.
Yes.
Yeah,
And financially responsible to ourselves.
Yeah, and to piggyback, and keep in mind too, that the RA, as Bree mentioned earlier, we've never taken occupied structure, and the ones that we've done in the past have all been properties that have been abandoned for the most part, or ones that people came to us and they weren't in a financial position to maintain the property and voluntarily turned it over to the RA for redevelopment. But most of these, and the reason it takes a while for these to go through is that the court process has to try to identify if there is an owner out there that can step up and take care of the property. And in most of these cases, they're not there, and nobody steps up, and that's when the RA comes in, takes over, control of the property, disposes of it for another use.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have some questions. How many properties does the Redevelopment Authority Board have currently?
That we own, two. One is still in an eminent domain stage, so it's a little bit of a, I'm hesitating because it's a little bit of a question mark. And the other is just coming out of eminent domain at this stage.
And who pays the taxes on the taxes, and who insures those? Who pays to insure them?
I'll answer that. Up until this point, we haven't insured any of the buildings. Now, the one that we just acquired, being the old police station, we are insuring that for now because it was on the city's policy. And until we have this, I'm sorry.
Who pays to insure them?
At the moment, it's under the city's policy, and the Redevelopment Authority is named insured on that policy.
So the taxpayers?
In a sense, on that particular building, yes.
The
Yeah, but up
taxpayers
until-
are paying to insure that?
That one particular building, yeah, but up until that point, no other buildings have been insured. The authority they've just, kind of taken on that risk ourselves, knowing that if the property needs to be demolished, that would have been used out of redevelopment authority funds at some point, or there's access to other state grants that can be used for that. But from a cost standpoint on the insurance side, that building's the only one currently that is costing any money. But from the redevelopment authority standpoint overall, the city, we're named insured on the city's policy, but there's really no rating exposure that's causing or generating premium for the city. So we have coverage under the city, but there's no added premium other than the retention of the police building at the moment to dispose of.
And how does the Redevelopment Authority Board, how do they obtain funding? How do you obtain funding? Do you get grants?
So we've gone down a couple different routes in the past. So we have, in the past, the city has allotted CDBG funding for the acquisition and demolition of the properties. But we actually found that there were a lot of strings attached with that. And in 2000 and, oh boy, this doesn't cobwebs off, like 10 or 11, we acquired a property on Washington Avenue with grant funding. And it was really cool because it was the first new build in Sunbury. They brought in a prefab home and...
But I'm talking current, like,
yeah.
How did you get your funding last year?
So I'm getting to that. So with that property, there was a sale of the property. And the sale proceeds of that property went into a fund that is the Redevelopment Authority's account. And that fund ever since has been circular. And so every property that we acquire or we help with maintenance on or expenses, the funds come out of the Redevelopment Authority. When we get to the end of the process or at any stage along the way where there's a sale of a property, those sales proceeds go back into the bank account. And the Redevelopment Authority has been stewarding that fund now since, what, 2011, 2012?
Yeah, but we
We've
don't
not
have an
asked for any
allotment
additional
out of the
funding.
city budget, we don't get any money from the city for any kind of operations, it's a self-sustaining organization, like we said, that
It just-
basically run the last 15 years off of a grant that we were generous enough to receive at that point, and we've been able to use that money to continue the process and get rid of the worst of the worst properties.
And the money is used for maintenance on, what is the money spent for?
The majority of the fund is acquisition.
What-
Acquisition.
fees.
Oh,
What
sorry.
the biggest expense for the redevelopment authority is our legal expense. I mean, everything that happens in this blight remediation process is a legal process and action. So we get together and make decisions as a board, but we can't do anything until it goes through a court process and somebody gives us either the property and title or whatever the case may be, but it has to go through, you know, that eminent domain process involves a lot of court hearings and document finding, fact finding, things like that. But that's the biggest expense goes to the legal team, really. And there's a lot of work to do on that side.
Yeah, I would say that acquisition, clean out, I think
Yeah,
of lock changes, I mean, just sort of basic expenses.
And so do you redevelop any properties or do you just sell them as is?
The latter on that. At this point, we've held public auctions, we've done direct sales, and for the most part, other than maybe doing that clean out that I mentioned, the redevelopment authority is not redeveloping the property before they're sold. Most of the time, there is an identified neighbor or developer or interested party who would like to come in and they have the resources to bring contractors in and redevelop them themselves. So it's
So
really
that
not
you've
necessary.
never redeveloped any properties, you've always sold them as is?
The only one we did was what Bree referenced earlier was the project on Washington Avenue where we had a structure that was torn down, we brought a modular home in and put a whole new home in place. But other than that, the process has worked pretty well with acquiring and selling either through auction or on the, you know, regular real estate listings now, and letting the market determine what to do with them at that point. Yeah, but we haven't gone in and rehabbed the house other than the rebuild. We haven't gone in and done any renovations and flipped homes for, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Only, really, if anything's required, is CMP structure.
Do you see any rebuilds possibly happening in the future with, you know, we just sold a bunch of lots? Do you see anything like in the future, if you obtain lots, hey, that's a nice place to have a rebuild for a property that, why not?
The only holding costs,
What, I'm sorry.
holding costs to the redevelopment authority and the city, the risk for the construction, the time involved in obtaining the contractors and, yep.
I mean, if we could find somebody, I mean, ideally, we'd love to do something like that, in my opinion, but, you know, there's, you know, it's gonna take someone with a different skill set than the people on the board, probably, someone that's a redeveloper, a property developer, that could come in and has the resources to do that sort of thing. But if we, you know, had identified some areas that you could do something like that, we'd certainly support it. But for us to take on building like a, you know, senior housing complex or something.
Yeah,
I
nothing
think
like
that's
that,
gonna
you
be
know,
hard.
like, you know, we just sold, I forget how many properties that used to have homes at one time were tore down, were just lots that were ended up given to the city. You know, something like that, you know, small, you know, as you guys said, prefab home, that, hey, you know, when we sell the lot, we get, you know, a couple $100, peanuts in tax revenue compared to putting a small fab house on it. Everybody wins more with taxes in the long run. I mean, you see,
It's a risk,
I
like,
mean,
you'd much rather have a private developer take on that risk.
Absolutely.
Of
I'd
investing
rather-
in something
I'd rather
than
return.
identify an adequate partner or investor with the city and redevelopment
So what
authority and someone that we know and trust than to let's just say I go out and the redevelopment authority in the city decides we're gonna put a $200,000 house on that lot. What are we gonna do with that money? Besides acquisition of lighted properties that are minimal cost and maintenance. Where will, essentially, responsibly speaking, where is that now windfall of money going to go?
You mean, if you just say you build a property and resell, where does that money go then? Is that what you-
Correct.
When it go like back into this, do the same thing over and over again?
We're not acquiring property.
I'm just asking, cause like, you did it, not saying you guys did it.
Same.
You did it with Washington Avenue, probably, was that a success story? Like, how could that happen? It happened one time, and it couldn't happen again, I guess is my question.
It's a good question, and actually, I know Derek was speaking of it, even just, I will put this out there, there is a lot of energy around thinking about your 4 Ps, private, public, philanthropic partnership happening right now. Even this morning's senator hearing around blight and downtown revitalization, it's all very promising, but there could be resources where you can come in and do larger projects like that. So I think there's a lot of watching from a lot of angles. You also have to keep in mind, and I don't know offhand the properties that you're mentioning for sure, but a lot of the properties that ended up being demoed that I was involved with, they also had antiquated setbacks. They weren't actually set up for new builds in a way that you could just turn that on. It's actually a larger project, like thinking about a block or a larger area of the city and what you can do. Again, with maybe more of those private combination projects like the Vine in other parts of the state. We've got a lot of good momentum of talk happening right now on that, so maybe we explore that. But it, again, will take all hands on deck, all team members to understand that it's a process and everybody plays their part. And so, just understanding that there's a whole team working behind the scenes, I think is huge for tonight's state.
Real quick, Mayor, to answer your question, I think the reason mainly we didn't do any other new builds was we lost money on that project, right? We put more money into it than we were able to sell it for, so while it was a good success story and it was nice to put a new property up, we kind of took it on the chin, right? We left, I think, somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 on that grant that we had for what we spent on that project and what we could sell it for. So that's when we basically refocused and went on the path that we are now with and just, acquire and sell it.
Mayor, if you want to do what you're referring to, where we would have to land bank and strategically look at blocks or that would be good for that, or that we have 2 properties on and one's starting to go through the eminent domain process because we would have to do the public-private partnership or philanthropic at that point, potentially. Because to your point, having one of those properties, doing that with wasn't a profitable, but you're gonna need 3, 4 of those units in order to turn a profit for a private developer, so that's why you're looking at that maybe that block or something like that, but that is strategic. You gotta take a look where you wanna do that, because you don't wanna do that throughout the city. You're not, you're gonna pick strategically where you're gonna do that. So there's a whole different aspect that we would have to get into that would take a lot longer than 13 minutes to talk about and really decide how we wanna focus that.
And to manage expectations on that, a lot of those larger projects do typically take 3 to 5 years. And so if there is interest in exploring those, you get the ball rolling, there's a whole process. Believe it or not, 5 years blinks and you have a 6-year-old. So, it does happen quickly, but you have to get the ball rolling. And so that's where we, again, I will just stand up here and say I'm really excited about all the conversations and the overlap of conversations that are happening right now, because there's real chances to work with you, and especially the downtown commercial side of things would be really neat.
I was just gonna say too, I'm sorry, whoever I just interrupted, but Adam and I have talked to Bree and with the police station downtown, that would be, in my opinion, the perfect model of how do we all get together and make sure that we understand, because as we go into this commercial world where we're only a year into a 3-year process of identifying commercial properties that are coming on, figuring out how to well work together and make sure we understand the process and ask all the right questions and do things in the right procedure would be a really great testing ground before we would launch into redevelopment.
And I have had conversations with the developer to come tour that particular building, the old police station, and see what he thinks could be done with it, if anything, from his standpoint. So there's stuff going on behind the scenes that doesn't maybe get into a meeting minute somewhere, but hopefully in the next week or two, I'm, gonna have something to go through with our group and see what his thoughts are on the possibility of redeveloping that particular building.
So, quick question. I have a property that's half a block from my house. It's been on the nuisance list for probably 2 years. Last time I checked with the code office, they told me it was in the judge's hands. I didn't hear anything about a judge here today. So,
Okay, so that's probably a reference to, it's probably at a stage in the eminent domain process.
okay.
That is its own process, if you will, of going back and forth within the court system through a declaratory judgment and a court hearing. If you, just take me aside offline, I can talk to you specifics about that property, even if I could give some sort of indication of, it looks like near future down the road. But certainly in the meantime, while those properties are in eminent domain, a lot of times, again, they're vacant. So having eyes on them and working with the code office to make sure that, they're still batten down the hatches, if you will, to make sure that everything is okay. Then it may not be one I'm involved with, but I can talk to you offline and put you in the right direction if that's helpful.
All right, great, thank you.
I think,
So I just want to, for everybody, I just want to offer some words of affirmation because, a little odd, right? So you spoke about the code officers and the social workers, and the social worker really wants to realize that it's your role and function to do what you're doing, and you're doing it well to the point where the head of the Senate Majority's Policy Committee invited you guys to speak today. You testified in a statewide hearing. You talked about systems that are not only working, but looking to be replicated across the state. And that's huge, and it's huge in a world that a lot of people don't understand. So I just want to thank all of you and the board, and especially for knowing your role and function, to not only do what you're doing as a redevelopment authority, but also navigating the lane, saying, this is what we do well, maybe you can find a developer, this is what we need from the city. So thank you for staying in your lane and helping us get in ours to help you do that. So I wanted to offer and I will say publicly that the county run the property sales and I help out with tax bases, and Sunbury has gone in the past few years from 3 villages to 1 line, 1 house. So
Maybe confusing and convoluted.
It's definitely
Big shit tonight, huh? Yeah.
At any level, open door policy.
Oh, no, so sorry. Can I ask what your annual legal fees are for the redevelopment authority?
I charge a retainer of $2,500. I should say my law office says, I do have a law partner, my husband.
$2,500 per year?
No, per month. I do waive occasionally when we hit holidays like the summer months or the holiday season, because I try to tie it to actual activity, not just charge to charge. But try to keep it as minimal as possible because honestly I'm standing up here as much as part of this team as anybody else. So, and that is for all costs associated with it. So all that admin that I was talking about, all the phone calls, open door policy, I'm answering questions, court hearings, you name it. That's what we're even for.
And how many meetings do you hold regularly or just the authority board?
For the Redevelopment Authority, they're scheduled annually to meet monthly. They do not always meet monthly because we don't need to meet. We can do productive activity behind the scenes depending on the timeline of how it's intersecting with the other groups that I was describing. So sometimes we meet, we rarely meet all 12 because there is the holiday season that mixed in. But we've met anywhere from 4 to 10 on average. I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that's going to adjourn our meeting here for tonight on the work session because we have a next council meeting here in 5 minutes. So. Thank you, Bree, thank you everyone for clearing it up, thank you.